They buried him, not once, not twice, but 6 times, and each time he returned, naked, silent, smiling. In the village of Ijele, they now whisper only one thing: Pa Madu is no longer a man, he's something else. In the southeastern hills of Nigeria, beneath the shadow of towering mango trees and winding red clay roads, there sat a small village called Ijele. The village, known for its stillness and timelessness, was home to generations of people who lived simple lives. But amid the tranquility of this village, there was one man who had lived so long that his age became a legend. Pa Madu. Old beyond measure, Pa Madu was a man whose very existence defied the logic of time. No one in the village knew his exact age, but the elders guessed he was well over 120 years old. He had outlived his wives, his children, and even his closest friends. Yet, despite his age, Pa Madu still walked with a steady gait, and his sharp, clear eyes showed no sign of slowing. Pa Madu lived alone in a small mud hut beside the ancient Iroko tree, a tree older than the village itself. Every morning, he would sit outside, sipping palm wine and humming old war songs. His life was solitary, but it was also one of contentment, until one day that all changed. It was market day when the village was shaken by an unexpected cry. Pa Madu is dead. He collapsed under the Iroko tree. Women dropped their baskets, and men rushed barefoot across the village square. When they arrived at the Iroko tree, there he lay, cold, unmoving, his body lifeless. The village nurse checked his pulse. There was none. The elders nodded solemnly, exchanging glances of quiet understanding. "He has finally gone home," said the chief, his voice heavy with respect. The villagers quickly prepared for the funeral, as was their custom. Pa Madu was washed in camwood, wrapped in white cloth, and buried beneath the very tree he had spent countless hours under. The ceremony was swift, dignified, and respectful, but there was an eerie stillness in the air that night. By morning, everything had changed. Children screamed from the hills. "Pa Madu is walking. Pa Madu is walking near the graves." Sure enough, there he was, covered in dirt, walking slowly, staring up at the sky as if confused, but strangely calm. "You people buried me too quickly," Pa Madu said, his voice gruff but clear. "I only needed rest." Some villagers laughed nervously, unsure of what to make of the situation. Others froze in terror. The priest, for the first time in his life, said nothing. It was the first death of many, and with it came the realization: Pa Madu was no ordinary man. 2 months later, Pa Madu collapsed again, this time in the middle of a quiet evening meal. He had just finished eating yam porridge when he suddenly coughed. His body convulsed, and then he fell still. No one dared touch him at first, but after an hour of waiting, the village nurse confirmed his death. They were thorough this time. The priest sprinkled holy water over his body, and 3 witnesses signed a palm leaf document attesting to his death. But despite their careful measures, the village was not prepared for what came next. Once again, Pa Madu's body was buried, this time deeper, with nails driven into the coffin and salt sprinkled all around the grave. The village chief declared, "This time it is final." But by the 3rd night, hunters returning from the bush were the first to spot him, naked, wet, and walking by the river, humming an old lullaby. The villagers were shaken to their core. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. No normal man returns from 2 graves. He's using juju. He is no longer one of us. As the days passed, Pa Madu's reputation grew even more mysterious. The 3rd time he died, it was during a festival. He had collapsed in the middle of a dance, his body contorting strangely before going still. The drummers stopped playing, the dancers froze, and no one dared approach him. The priest performed Okpuru Mamiri, the sacred rites meant to prevent a return. But 5 days later, a young girl saw him sitting beneath the Iroko tree, calmly eating roasted plantains. It was as if nothing had happened. The villagers were no longer afraid of him. They were terrified of what he represented. His very existence began to symbolize something far beyond their understanding. The fourth death came soon after, and this time no one dared touch his body. They left him in the village shrine, locked away for 3 days. When Pa Madu emerged, he simply walked out as if nothing had changed, humming an old tune. "He's not just a witch," one villager whispered. "He is Awa Muo, a wandering spirit." Even his grandchildren had begun to flee the village, afraid of the man who seemed beyond the grasp of life and death. It was during this return that Pa Madu first saw Adama. She had been in the village all along, a quiet woman who had always cared for the elderly, the sick, and the abandoned. She had watched Pa Madu from a distance, offering him food, checking on him during his weaker moments. But unlike the other villagers, she did not fear him. Adama was not born in Ijele village. She came from a distant land, a neighboring village where her family had once thrived as traders. But tragedy had struck her family. Her father had died in a mysterious accident, and her mother had been lost to illness shortly after. With no family left, Adama had been taken in by her aunt, who lived in Ijele. Aunt Vera had always been a kind woman, but she had her own troubles, chief among them, trying to make a living from farming after her husband's death. Adama had learned early on that life was not easy, but it taught her resilience. As a young girl, she had watched her mother and father struggle to provide, and she had vowed to live a life of integrity and strength. Despite her hardships, she had always been kind-hearted, a quality that made her stand out to those around her. In her early years in Ijele, she took to the land with her aunt. However, as time passed, Adama felt increasingly out of place in the small, quiet village. The women of the village had a subtle way of segregating themselves, and Adama, with her independent spirit, had trouble fitting into the rhythms of their communal life. She often retreated to the outskirts of the village, where she found solace in the simplicity of nature. It was during one of these solitary walks, beneath the shade of the towering Iroko tree, that she first met Pa Madu. The old man had been sitting under the tree, drinking palm wine slowly, lost in his thoughts. His weathered face, full of stories, caught her attention. There was something about his presence, something about the way he observed the world with a quiet, yet profound gaze that intrigued her. She did not know who he was at first, but she sensed that he carried the weight of many years. "Why do you sit alone, old man?" she had asked, her voice a soft but direct inquiry. Pa Madu looked up at her, his eyes sharp yet distant. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in his deep, gravelly voice, he replied, "I sit alone because I have lived so long that I have learned the value of silence. The world is full of noise, but in silence, I hear the things that others do not." Adama had smiled. There was something captivating about his words, something that resonated deeply within her. "I understand," she said quietly. "I too sometimes prefer the peace of solitude." From that moment, a connection began to form between them. Pa Madu, the ancient man who had seen generations come and go, began to find comfort in the presence of this young woman, who seemed to bring with her a quiet strength. He would share stories of his youth, his days as a warrior, the lands he had traveled, and the love he had known. Adama, in turn, listened with rapt attention, her heart drawn to the tales of a time long past. As time passed, Adama began to visit Pa Madu regularly, She brought him food from her aunt's farm, often staying to talk with him for hours. Their conversations were rich with the cultural wisdom of Pa Madu's years and the fresh, modern perspectives that Adama carried with her. They spoke of the past and the future, of life's struggles and joys. Pa Madu had always believed that the young people of today lacked the depth and wisdom of his generation. He had often looked at the younger villagers with disappointment, feeling that their lives were too consumed with material pursuits. But Adama was different. She was curious, respectful, and wise beyond her years. She did not judge him or his time, but instead embraced it, learning from him as if she were his student. The bond between them deepened, and Pa Madu found himself looking forward to her visits. Her presence was a balm to his often lonely heart. And in Adama, he began to see something he had not realized he longed for: a companion, someone who could see beyond his frailty and the burden of his age. Adama, too, began to look forward to their time together. In Pa Madu, she found a father figure, a source of strength and wisdom that she had never had before. She admired his resilience, his refusal to let time defeat him. But as much as she respected him, she could not escape the quiet sadness that lingered in his eyes, the deep longing for connection that he could not fully hide. As Pa Madu experienced his repeated deaths and resurrections, something inside him began to shift. At first, he had not understood why he kept returning. He had long given up on understanding the mysteries of life and death, but with each death, he became more aware of something he had never fully acknowledged. He feared dying alone. The resurrections had come unexpectedly, and each time they filled him with dread. He did not fear death. In fact, he welcomed it. But the thought of dying without leaving behind a legacy, without being remembered by someone who would mourn him, was a burden that gnawed at his soul. It was Adama's unwavering kindness, her gentle presence in his life, that began to change his outlook. In her, he saw the possibility of someone who could truly care for him, someone who might mourn him, someone who could carry his memory forward when he was gone. And it was this realization that became the turning point for Pa Madu. He knew that in his many years of life, he had accumulated wisdom, but it had all been for naught if there was no one to pass it on to, no one to remember the man he had been. One evening, after another of his mysterious deaths and resurrections, Pa Madu sat beside Adama, gazing at the setting sun. The golden light bathed the world in warmth, and the wind whispered through the trees. "I have lived many lives," he said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. "But there is one thing I have never had. I have never had someone who would mourn me when I am gone. I have never had someone who would remember me with love." Adama turned to him, her heart heavy with understanding. She had sensed this unspoken longing in him all along. It was not immortality that Pa Madu sought. It was the comfort of knowing that his life had mattered, that someone would hold him in their heart after his time on this earth had ended. "You are not alone, Pa Madu," Adama said softly, her voice full of warmth. "I will remember you. I will carry your memory. And when the time comes, I will mourn you. You will not be forgotten." For the first time in many years, a deep peace washed over Pa Madu. The fear that had haunted him for so long began to fade. He no longer feared dying alone, because he knew that Adama would remember him. She would carry his spirit forward, and in that he had found the greatest gift he could ask for. As Pa Madu's time drew closer, he found peace in the knowledge that he would leave this world with someone who would remember him. His many deaths had not been in vain. They had led him to this moment, to Adama. She had become his daughter, his confidant, his anchor in the storm of his existence. On his final death, Adama stayed by his side. She had become the one constant in his life, and in her, he saw the love he had longed for but never truly found. As his breath slowed and his eyes closed for the last time, she whispered softly, "You are not alone. I will carry your memory forever." With that, Pa Madu passed on, not in fear, but in peace. True immortality is not found in the number of years we live, but in the love and memories we leave behind. Pa Madu's greatest lesson was that in the end, it is the relationships we form and the connections we make that give our lives meaning. We do not live forever, but through the love we inspire, we live on in the hearts of those who remember us. Subscribe for more African stories from enchanted African realms. Comment below. Do you believe Pa Madu's return was a gift or a curse?